But I do need you to know that the whole reason that we're doing this weekend is because last year I wanted to get Dave McCormick to come to the event. Brian Kemp, it's like, you got to get Dave. He's the most impressive candidate we've seen. We think we can get him to run for the Senate. He's that good. You got to get him. It's like, well, I can't, birthday weekend, I got to be with the family. And so this year reached out, well, I can't, because birthday weekend, got to be with the family. It's like, what if I move my entire event by a week? Can we get you here? Now, there is a downside, is there were a couple other Senate candidates that we also wanted to get, and we moved it to this weekend because I wanted to make sure we got Dave McCormick, because the governor said, you got to get Dave McCormick. People need to see him. Then it turns out that this is state fair weekend in Montana and Wisconsin, so we wanted to get Sheehy and Hovde here as well. They're like, we can't, it's the state fair, we got to be at the state fair. That's okay, because I want to win Pennsylvania, because it's the Keystone State, and we got to beat Bob Casey. He's terrible, and we could have had an opportunity the last time to get McCormick and the Republicans by like a 1/10 of a point, win in a different direction, and we didn't win the seat. We can win the Pennsylvania Senate seat. We can win it for the presidency. And we've got the candidate who can do it. Brian Kemp and I both have been trying to get him here with this crowd so that you guys can see we have such an impressive pick for the U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. And that would be Dave McCormick.
Sorry about that.
No, listen, Brian and I were both like, we've got to move this so that we can get you here, because we're both such big fans of yours.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So if you wouldn't mind giving the crowd just some of your biography, because, and again, we're talking business people running for office as opposed to just people who've been lawyers all their lives.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you all for being here. I'm a Pennsylvania kid, a 7th generation Pennsylvanian. My dad was born in Indiana County. My mom was in Punxsutawney. So I always like to say that because I'm running against Punxsutawney Bob, who only pops his head up once every 6 years. And I grew up I was born in Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in Bloomsburg, not far from where Bob Casey grew up. And my folks had a farm, and I lived in the town, but I baled hay and trimmed Christmas trees. And in Pennsylvania, wrestling is the big sport. So I wrestled in high school. Wrestling got me to West Point. I wrestled in college, and then served in the 82nd Airborne Division, went to Iraq, and that was, defining. West Point for me, and we'll come back to this in the Senate race, duty, honor, country was what you learn there, and I've tried to live by that ever since. After the Army, I came back to Pennsylvania. I ran a tech company in Pittsburgh that created hundreds of jobs. It was a software company. Went and worked in the administration for President Bush in the White House, Deputy National Security Advisor, and then went and ran a big company called Bridgewater for 12 years, and resigned in 2021 to run for the Senate in Pennsylvania, where I lost a close one by 900 votes,
Yes.
as you know.
Okay, so now a side note here, I got to tell on myself. So his dad was in charge of public colleges in Pennsylvania,
That's right?
right? So I'm interviewing him on the radio. Now, I'm from the South. I hear University of Pennsylvania. I'm thinking, oh, state run. It's not. He was so diplomatic in pointing out, actually, my father wasn't in charge of that. He was public schools. But at the same time, University of Pennsylvania, we've had this wild situation up there with the anti-Semitic protests. And it's just, I was kind of stunned at a school like UPenn that has such a great business school reputation and everything. I didn't really realize how infested that sort of anti-Semitic sentiment could be at a place like that.
Well, listen, I think we've all, post-October 7th, as you know, my wife and I, Dina, went to Israel in early
Yeah, by the way, his wife is actually more awesome than him.
She is more awesome than me by a lot. If she were here, she would agree. And but we went to Israel. We went to Kfar Aza. We saw firsthand this butchery, this horrific evil. We met with hostage families. We met with survivors. You can't go there without coming away with the sense that we need to support Israel to destroy this evilness. And it's not just Hamas against Israel. It's Hezbollah, it's Islamic Jihad. The original sin is Iran. And the reason this is connected to the protests. Iran, which is the original sin in 2015, we did the Iran deal using billions of dollars to underwrite terrorist proxies around the world and around the Middle East. The deciding vote was Bob Casey, my opponent. So that context, I travel across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. At the University of Pennsylvania, we have these kids protesting. I go to the protest site where the encampment, the evilness, the vile things that are being said. Jewish kids intimidated, don't want to go to class. And you say, my God, how could that happen on our nation's campuses? This anti-Americanism, this anti-Semitism. And then you watch those 3 college presidents testify, and they're tying themselves in pretzels, not to say what's right or wrong, good or evil. And you say, that's how it happened. A lack of moral clarity, a lack of leadership. And that is one of the reasons I think we're in spiritual decline. I think this is evidence of a spiritual decline in our country. And this is a time we need courageous leaders. And my opponent, Bob Casey, is the opposite of that. Weak, has been unwilling to stand up and take a strong stand on just about anything, including anti-Semitism.
So for the last 3 weeks in a row, I think, I have been playing your ads on my radio show because I think your campaign team has done a better job defining Kamala Harris and Bob Casey's ties than anybody in the country. And it is remarkable to watch her suddenly say, I'm actually for fracking after campaigning against it. And also to watch Bob Casey, who, his dad was like the pro-life icon.
Right.
And of course, he gets to the U.S. Senate and betrays those values and walks away from that. He really has been a disappointment. Yeah,
this is why I'm very optimistic about November. I don't mean we don't have to bear down and run a great campaign in Pennsylvania and a great campaign nationally, but at least in Pennsylvania, we ran the ad you spoke about when Senator Casey came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. My team put together, it was just an internal team, a 22-year-old kid on the team, put together this digital commercial, and it started by Bob Casey saying, listen, she's ready to be president today. You're going to love her when you get to know her. And then it had 60 seconds. No Republican voice, no voiceover, nothing. It just had Kamala Harris saying, I want to ban fracking. I want to transition energy workers. I want to legalize illegal immigration. I want to make sure they have federal benefits. I want to have mandatory buybacks of guns. I want to have elimination of private health insurance. I want to reduce the consumption of red meat. Now, I'm not a political expert, but in Pennsylvania, if you're running on banning fracking, taking your guns, and taking away red meat, you're in trouble, right? So we just ran that commercial, and then at the end, it has Bob Casey saying, she's ready to be president today. You're going to love her when you get to know her. And I think that is the way that we're going to win. This is a radical agenda. People in Pennsylvania, and I don't think most people in America, want to have a set of policies that have failed so miserably in San Francisco. And so I think the way we beat Bob Casey and the way we beat Kamala Harris is to say it's a failed record on inflation, on border, on crime, on energy. 80% of Pennsylvanians think the country's going in the wrong direction. If you pick Kamala Harris and Bob Casey, I say them side by side because he's a 98% vote for the Biden-Harris agenda, you're going to have worse. You're going to have a liberal agenda that's going to take our country in a direction where you're going to wake up and you're not going to recognize it. And you don't have to believe me, just listen to her. So Ed Rendell, former governor, has obviously, I know you'll disagree with his characterization, but he did have this, it was a funny line when he said it, that Pennsylvania, you have to think of, you have Pittsburgh in the west, Philadelphia in the east, and the Confederacy in between. And his Alabama, he said Alabama.
his comparison just being, you've got these two major urban centers in the east and west of the state. You've got a lot of rural Pennsylvania, the T, they talk about it, Erie, then up in the northwest corner. How do you campaign and build a message between such diverse groups?
Well, I grew, sometimes they say it's Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Alabama. I grew up in the Alabama part. I grew up in a very conservative part of Pennsylvania. And here's the good news. I'm announcing it today. Pennsylvania is becoming red. Pennsylvania's, by 2026, if you have me back here, we're going to be red. That's hard to believe when you read all the stuff in the New York Times, right? We are on the way. So in 2016, when President Trump won, we had 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans. Today, we have 360,000. By Election Day, we'll have 300,000. And by 2026, we'll be red. So it's moving. And part of the reason it's moving is because working families are flipping. That the Democratic Party is becoming the party of the elite. The Republican Party is becoming a party that's dealing with working families. So what you have to do, we have of 67 counties, 56 of them are red. You got to get out the vote. You can't take them for granted. You got to tell them that their vote is going to be the difference between winning and losing. Then there's 11 counties that are purple or blue. And in those counties, there's persuadable voters. These are independents. 11% of our voters are independents. They think the country's going down over the cliff. You got to appeal to them. There's conservative Democrats, Jewish Democrats. We have 300,000 registered Jewish voters in Pennsylvania. 80% of them are Democrats. Do you think they look at what's going on the television and think that the Democratic Party is serving them well? There's a real opportunity there. African Americans. President Trump right now, the polls are very volatile. He's polling at 40% among African American males. If he came in at 20%, that would be a game changer, and if I can capture some of that. So there are multiple ways to win. The key is, the foundation is that base. And those 56 counties, those rural counties, you got to get them out to vote. You got to convince people that their future depends on it. I did a talk at Penn State the other day, and I stopped in the middle of it. It's 50 kids of the college Republicans at Penn State, may have been the only Republicans at Penn State, but I got them in a room and I said, listen, I'm going to be okay regardless of what happens in this election. I'm 58. I got more years behind me than in front of me. But for you young people, you got to vote and get active like your life depends on it, because it does. The country that we all have appreciated and loved and benefited from, it's not going to be there for them. So we got to get people mobilized on this election, the significance of it. It really is. All politicians have said this forever, but this really is the most important election of our lifetimes. And the consequences of getting it wrong, Kamala Harris, a Democratic Senate, say goodbye to the filibuster, say hello to 4 new Senate seats in Puerto Rico and Washington, say hello to Supreme Court packing, say hello to new taxes. I mean, this is going to be a wide open border, legalization of illegal immigrants. It'll be a country we won't recognize. That's why we got to get people out to vote. We got to win.
I want to test your political acumen and diplomatic skills. Philly sports or Pittsburgh sports?
You know, you can't have it both ways. You got to. I'm Pittsburgh.
Yes.
You know, now when I'm in Philadelphia, I don't say anything bad about Philadelphia, but I'm a Pittsburgh kid, and I'm a big.
That's
Steelers
good.
fan.
You know, so I've only been to Pennsylvania a couple of times, and every time I always hear like there seems to be this stigma for Pittsburgh. I think it's one of the coolest entryways into any city in America. You come through this tunnel, and suddenly you've got the river in the city. It's just the coolest entrance to any city.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I lived there. I have 6 daughters now, but I had 4 biological daughters, and 3 of them I had in Pittsburgh, and I lived a big part of my life there. But I got to tell you, and it's beautiful. But I got to tell you, it's sad now. And I attribute it to many of the failed policies of Biden, Casey, Harris, that direction of our country, particularly as it relates to crime. And downtown Pittsburgh today is a shell of what it was when I ran a company there. And just to put in perspective, we had 1,000 police officers in 2020 in Pittsburgh Police Force. We have 650 today.
Wow.
So 4 years later, we have 650. It's 2/3 of what it was. In my neighborhood, I live in Squirrel Hill, which is in the city, right near University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. And the patrols in my neighborhood are half what they were 4 years ago. And this is a problem across Pennsylvania and much of America, where the combination of the defund the police movement, the lack of support for qualified immunity, just the lack of public leaders standing behind law enforcement has gutted our law enforcement community. And it's a huge deal. And so we see the fentanyl crisis. We see crime going up in these urban centers, storefronts closing. With remote work, we don't have enough people downtown. We have the homeless problem. We have illegal immigrants that are encamping in our urban centers. Philadelphia is unrecognizable. So this is a big difference between us and them. This is a big difference between the world that Kamala Harris and Bob Casey won. Bob Casey supported the defunding the police movement. He won't stand for qualified. I have this great picture in an ad of Bob Casey taking a knee with a Biden COVID mask on and his fist up in the air. I said, if that doesn't win me the election in Pennsylvania, nothing will. Right? So this is an ideology that really is going to destroy our communities. And I was doing a fundraiser out west, and I was describing out in California. I was describing, we got this crazy district attorney in Philadelphia. You're not going to believe me. Soros funded, a guy named Larry Krasner. He's got this rule where if you steal less than $1,000, you don't get prosecuted. I mean, you're not going to believe it. And these are a bunch of California Republicans, and they said, oh, yeah, we have that rule in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and it was the beginning of the end. in terms of San Francisco just being destroyed. That's the ideology we're fighting against, and Bob Casey has not only not fought against it, he's been a weak and enabler of it.
So we talk about Pittsburgh. You've got this massive population base in Philadelphia that leans pretty Democrat, media markets that bleed in that are pretty hostile to you. How do you go in and find the persuadable people there as a candidate to try to convince them they need to abandon the Casey name that they've known for so long in politics in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, there's 5 counties in southeast Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia's one. Bucks, Montgomery, Chester, and Delaware are the other 4. Bucks, we just flipped. Bucks is now more Republican, registered Republicans than Democrats. And the key is to be in those 4 counties, not Philadelphia directly, is to be very focused on the kitchen table issues. Number 1's inflation. So for 60% of Pennsylvanians and for most Americans, they're living paycheck to paycheck. You got to remind yourself of that almost every day. 60% living paycheck to paycheck. So when prices go up by 21% and wages haven't kept up, these folks are getting squeezed on food, fuel, and rent. It's the same in the rural counties as it is in those suburban counties. And that inflation is the direct result of terrible policy. 2 things. One, it's the Republicans and Democrats have been spending too much for 20 years, but it's been a hockey stick under Biden. $7 trillion of new spending. That's been the direct driver of inflation. That plus a war on fossil fuels. So when you talk to people in Pennsylvania, you know, there's social issues and so that are energizing among some. But the number 1 issue is the economy. The economy's not working. And that applies to those collar counties. And by the way, inflation's not a Republican problem or an independent problem or a Democratic problem. That's killing us all. The second issue is the border. And you say, why is the border such a big deal in Pennsylvania? Well, the number 1 reason, you know, we see the illegal immigrants are depressing wages. We see the burden on social services. We have 13 sanctuary cities or counties in Pennsylvania, so it's a big pervasive issue. But the number 1 reason is fentanyl. We lost 4,000 Pennsylvanians last year from fentanyl, 4,000. And we lost 100,000 nationally. So for you, those of you in the audience that were in the Vietnam era, just to put this in perspective, we lost 53,000 Americans in 8 years of war in Vietnam. We had 2 Vietnams last year. Fentanyl coming across our borders, the cartels, the distribution network, wide open borders. It comes across legal and illegal entries. And this is poison in every way. And the Biden administration and Bob Casey's been with him every step of the way, hasn't stopped it. They didn't finish the wall. They haven't had remain in Mexico. They haven't supported the Border Patrol. I went to see this myself a couple times. I've been to the border more times than the borders are, and Senator Casey. And when you get there, it is stunning. And I'll just tell you a little quick story. I'll be really, really quick. There's lots to talk about. But I went to Yuma, Arizona about 6 weeks ago. I'm standing at the border at 2 in the morning in Yuma, Arizona with the Border Patrol. And you're walking along, there's this incredible wall, and then the wall stops. And 300 yards away, there's a storage area where you see all this steel that was purchased to finish the wall, but Biden stopped it on day 1. And we paid for the labor for this too. So the wall stops at 2 in the morning, right in front of me. This isn't something I saw on Fox News. 50 people walk across the border, right in front of me. And in that group of 50 that I personally saw, 5 military-age men from Syria and 5 Chinese nationals. Just in the 50 I saw. 10 million have crossed the border, hundreds on the terrorist watch list. We are, I'll make a prediction here, which I hope doesn't come true. We have no idea the national security risk that's become embedded in our country over the last 3.5 years. I mean, people from all over the world. These aren't from Mexico or Central America. These are people from Central Asia, people from the Middle East. This is a national security threat that I'm sad to say I think will come home to roost sometime down the road here.
I'm afraid so. You know, the difference between you and a Democrat is if a Democrat had been down there, they would have gotten them registered to vote as they came across the wall.
That's exactly right. That's exactly. And Eric, you know this, but sometimes people miss that. You know, the illegal immigrants are legally allowed to vote. However, the Democrats and Bob Casey supported this with a vote. Those 10 million illegal immigrants are counted in the census. I mean, this is huge. This is huge. This is a right in front of us. They're stealing the election in the following sense. Those 10 million people get counted in the census. That directs how many congressional seats are given to particularly blue states like New York and California. And of course, those electoral seats determine the number of votes in the Electoral College. So if you want to think about stacking the deck, those 10 million illegal immigrants counted in the census is something that's happening right in front of us, and it's going to do huge damage. Not to mention the fact that Kamala Harris has said, and Bob Casey will support, legalizing those illegal immigrants once they get into office.
All right, you went there because this is I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. This is my actual, I am convinced that as so many people leave New York, Illinois, in California and places like that, that they actually are using an illegal immigrant population to pop up the census count just so they don't lose congressional districts.
I don't think that census vote isn't directly a political calculation. I agree with you. I mean, they're not hiding it. They're going right out front. What's the logic for saying 10 million illegal immigrants should be counted in the census? What's the logic? There is no logic other than a political logic.
Right.
And I think it's a real problem. I mean, in Pennsylvania, obviously Pennsylvania's been the center of a lot of debate and uncertainty and chaos around whether the elections are going to be fair. And so we're putting a huge effort in making sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure we have an army of observers, to make sure we have the right legal support, to make sure we clean the voter rolls, to make sure we have the right inspections of the voting machines, to make sure we have the right observation of lock boxes, or drop boxes rather, because it's going to be so close. This is going to be a close race. I'm going to win this by a point or two.
So you mentioned that. I thought it was notable that when Senator McConnell was here yesterday and he was talking about needing to win more elections and how good our candidate quality was this year, and he always does it in the order of the races that he thinks are the most viable, and obviously West Virginia flipping it seems very, very interesting. He put you very high on the list of seats that he thinks that we can win, which I think is very notable for him to be able to do that.
Yeah, listen, I think, here's what I honestly think. I think our country is in deep, deep trouble. I mean, I honestly do. When my wife and I were debating whether to run after losing last time, we kept saying, let's move on with our lives. We're almost empty nesters. We have one daughter left. We have 6 daughters. One daughter left who is a senior in high school. We talked to our daughters about it. They're not exactly for me running. By that, I mean they're 100% opposed to me running. But every time I went to pick up the phone and move on and take a job or join a board or something, I just kept getting pulled back to this moment, which is if you believe in America, you think America's the most exceptional country in the world, you've been blessed by America, which I bet most of you think you've been blessed by all America has to offer. If you think America's in deep trouble, which I do, and you think you can do something about it, then you got to do it. And I believe I believe I can and will win this seat. It's going to be tough, but 80% of Pennsylvanians think the country's going in the wrong direction. They don't buy into this crazy liberal, weak agenda. Bob Casey's been truly a terrible senator. And by terrible, I mean you can't point to one thing that he has done that's meaningfully changed the life of Pennsylvanians in 18 years. He's been a rubber stamp for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and he will be a rubber stamp for the even more weak liberal agenda of the future. So if you believe those things and you trust that Pennsylvanians are feeling the things that I'm saying, they want change. And polls go up and down, but the thing I feel on the ground is, and I suspect this is what Leader McConnell was talking about, man, there's energy. There is energy wherever I go because I think people want some. And by the way, what I say to everybody is, listen, I'd be honored to do this job. It's not the best job I will have ever had. I'm doing it out of love of country, and I don't know anybody anything. I don't know President Trump anything. I'm grateful for his support, but I don't know him anything. I don't know Leader McConnell anything. The only people I owe anything to are the people of Pennsylvania. And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I'm going to be a strong voice for them and for our country. And so I feel honored to do it, and I kind of feel like God has a plan, and we'll see if it's the plan I think it is.
Well, it is worth pointing out, too. I mean, it's not too long. You had Senator Toomey, great Republican senator who was able to win repeatedly there. You've had Republican governors recently there. So, I mean, sometimes I think Republicans think, oh, Pennsylvania, it's so far off there. Not really. You regularly get Republicans
Well, particularly with
there.
that movement I was describing on registration. We're becoming red at a time when the policies of the Democrats are more and more out of step with Pennsylvania.
So if people here who aren't from Pennsylvania want to get involved and help you, what can they do?
Yeah, I have a website, DaveMcCormickPA.com, and I've tried to lay out on that website all my positions so people know what I'm about and why I'm running. And then, I did one yesterday. I've been doing a series of speeches, which seems like an anachronistic thing of the past. But I thought, boy, wouldn't it be good for the people of Pennsylvania to know where their senator would try to take the country, and where he would vote. So I've laid out speeches on energy policy, which is a huge issue in Pennsylvania, family policy, how to make sure we're supporting families, a speech on China, a speech on how to break the bureaucracy of Washington. Last night, I gave one on national security, which I'm sad to say I think is a real looming issue. I think our security is really at risk beyond the border, but from adversaries around the world. And that agenda is also on there. And so it's one thing to win the race, which I plan to do. It's another thing to actually hit the ground and make a difference when you get there, and that's what I'm hoping I can do.
So if you do get there, and I really do hope you, literally, we moved the event this weekend because Brian and I wanted to get you here as badly as we did. If you get there, what committees are the ones that really interest you?
Well, I don't want to jinx myself by talking about committees. That seems like a sort of measuring curtains. What I will say is that I think of the many issues confronting us, and where we have one of the biggest contrasts is on energy. Mm-hmm. Energy policy is under the direction of Biden and Harris, I think is taking us in a terrible direction. I think there's a focused effort to eliminate fossil fuel consumption. That's made us more dependent on China for lithium batteries and solar panels. That's driven up the price of energy for all Americans, and that's hurt industrial jobs and jobs across the country. So I will be a senator that wants to fight for energy dominance. And energy dominance is great for our national security because we're exporting our natural gas and energy around the world. Pennsylvania is the 4th largest natural gas reserves in the world. If we were a country, we'd be number 4. We literally have Saudi Arabia under our feet in Pennsylvania. Saudi Arabia can pump 10 million barrels of petroleum a day. We have that much natural gas capacity under our feet. So unleashing that's critical for national security. It's incredible for our economy because these jobs, these young people, I grew up thinking you had to get a college degree to have a great middle-class career. You don't. These are great skilled labor, trade jobs that'll last for decades. And here's the clincher. It's good for our environment. I'm an environmentalist. I'm a conservationist. I believe that the best way to curb carbon emissions globally is to export our great natural gas from places like Pennsylvania and replace coal-fired plants in India and China where they're just decades behind us. So this is an area where you could not have more of a stark difference between Kamala Harris and weak liberal Bob Casey and what a strong Republican vision will be. President Trump, I think, has a similar vision to what I just said. And that's where I think I can be a really strong voice because it's a national security issue, it's an economic issue, and Pennsylvania has a lot to offer America and the world when it comes to energy resources.
Dave, listen, I mean it. I wanted you to be here. I'm so glad you could come. I want you in the United States Senate more than most. So thank you. It's a trip down, it's a hike, but thank you very much for coming.
Hey, listen, I'm honored to be here, Eric. Thanks so much. And I'll just finish by saying, in wrestling, which I wrestled in college, I wasn't the best wrestler, but I always knew if I could get in the third period and be within a point or two, I'd win because it's all about conditioning, intensity, heart, and staying on offense. And that's what it's going to require for these next 85 days. And so every morning when Bob Casey wakes up, I want him to say, oh my God, that guy's everywhere. He's in my face constantly. When will he go away? I'm not going away. And I won't go away when I'm in the United States Senate. So
essentially, I guess we need to make him not see his shadow so he goes away in better days.
We need to get him to debate. Yeah. We need to get him. The more you see of Bob Casey and the more you see of Kamala Harris, I'm confident that Donald Trump and I will look a lot better.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Dave McCormick. I really
that was awesome.
It so much.
So good to have me. Thank you.
Anything I can do to help, let me know.
Thanks, Eric.
Absolutely.